The emergency lights cast strange shadows across the council chamber as Ambassador Crystal stood before the most important meeting of her life. Her crystal-like skin reflected the blue glow, but her heart was heavy with the weight of terrible. And outside the massive windows of the space station, she could see the last refugee ships arriving from the outer colonies. Each vessel carried survivors with the same haunting look in their eyes, the look of people who had watched their worlds burn. The Villanari Confederation had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years. They were proud of their peaceful ways, their advanced technology, and their ability to solve conflicts through talking rather than fighting. But now, for the first time in their history, talking wasn't enough. The enemy they faced didn't want to negotiate. It didn't want territory or resources. It wanted to consume everything living. The Harthic swarm had appeared from the dark spaces between stars like a nightmare made real. These creatures didn't just conquer worlds, they ate them. Every plant, every animal, every person became food for their endless hunger. What made them truly terrifying was their ability to adapt. Each time the galaxy's armies found a way to hurt them, the swarm would change, becoming stronger and more dangerous. Crystal had watched 47 civilizations fall in just 2 years. The brilliant Zephyrins, who could solve any problem with their incredible minds, had been overwhelmed in weeks. The Lorian Collective, masters of technology that seemed like magic, had retreated to their core worlds and sealed themselves away. The mighty Merton Empire, with their vast fleets and powerful weapons, had fought bravely but ultimately failed. Now it was the Villanari's turn to face extinction. "We have exhausted every option," Crystal said to the council members, her voice steady despite her fear. "Our allies have either fallen or abandoned us. Our weapons are useless. Our strategies have failed. The swarm will reach our home worlds." Within 6 months, the council chamber erupted in worried voices. Some members demanded they retreat like the others. Some insisted they keep fighting with conventional methods. But Crystal had spent sleepless nights studying old files, looking for any possibility they might have missed. That's when she found them, the files marked with warning symbols and sealed by galactic law, files about a species that had been quarantined for over 200 years because they were considered too dangerous to interact with. A species from a world so hostile that most scientists believe complex life couldn't possibly evolve there, the humans of Earth. The galaxy called them Deathworlders, a term that was both an insult and a warning. Their planet was a nightmare of extreme weather, deadly creatures, natural disasters, and toxic environments. According to the files, these humans had not only survived on such a world, but had actually thrived. They had turned their hostile environment into strength, becoming the most adaptable and resilient species ever discovered. But what made them truly frightening to the peaceful galaxy was their relationship with violence. While other species saw warfare as a last resort, humans seemed to approach it as just another tool for survival. They had been quarantined not because they were evil, but because their casual attitude toward conflict made other species deeply uncomfortable. "I propose we contact the humans," Crystal announced, and the chamber fell silent. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Council members shouted objections, called her insane, and demanded she be removed from her position. The humans were savages, they said, barbarians who solved every problem with violence. The very idea of asking them for help was an insult to thousands of years of civilized behavior. But Crystal stood firm. "Tell me," she said when the shouting died down, "what exactly do we have left to lose? Our civilization is already dying. Our peaceful ways, our advanced culture, our moral superiority, none of it matters if we're all dead in 6 months." The debate raged for hours, but in the end, desperation won. A narrow vote gave Crystal permission to make contact with the quarantined world. As she prepared the transmission, she couldn't help but wonder if they were making a terrible mistake. Were they about to invite monsters into their galaxy? Or were they about to discover that sometimes monsters were exactly what you needed? Meanwhile, billions of light years away on a small blue planet, Dr. Elena Vasquez was finishing another quiet night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station. She had been listening to the cosmos for over 20 years, hoping to hear something that would prove humanity wasn't alone in the universe. Most nights brought nothing but cosmic background noise and the occasional signal from old satellites, but at exactly 3:47 in the morning, her equipment detected something impossible, a structured signal coming from deep space. As the computers worked to decode it, Elena felt her heart racing. This wasn't random noise or natural phenomena. This was clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, and clearly not from Earth. The translation took several hours, but when it was complete, Elena stared at her screen in shock. The message was simple, desperate, and changed everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the universe. We are dying. Our worlds burn. We know of your reputation as warriors. We offer everything we have for your aid. Please respond, Elena. Read the message again and again, trying to process what it meant. Somewhere out there, an alien civilization was facing extinction. They had somehow learned about humanity and were reaching out for help. But what struck her most was the phrase, reputation as warriors. What reputation? Humanity had never made contact with aliens before. Or had they? As Eleanor reached for the emergency phone to contact her superiors, she realized that everything was about to change. Humanity had spent decades wondering if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew they weren't, and apparently, they knew. Neighbors were in trouble. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. This is Director Johnson. Sir, this is Dr. Vasquez at Deep Space Monitoring. You need to get down here immediately. We've received a transmission from an extraterrestrial source. There was a long pause. Elena, it's for in the morning. Are you sure about this? Elena looked at her screen one more time. At the message that would end humanity's isolation forever. Sir, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And, Director, you're going to want to call the president. The aliens aren't just saying hello. They're asking for our help in a war. As she hung up the phone, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would be remembered as the turning point in human history, for better or worse. Humanity was about to step onto the galactic stage. The only question was whether they would be seen as heroes or as the very monsters the galaxy had always feared they were. Outside her window, the sun was beginning to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. It looked like any other sunrise, but Elena knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between the stars, desperate aliens were waiting for an answer from the species they called Deathworlders, and humanity was about to show them exactly what that name meant. The United Nations building had never seen anything like this. Within 72 hours of receiving the alien message, world leaders from every nation had gathered for the most important meeting in human history. The usual political arguments and territorial disputes suddenly seemed petty when faced with the reality that humanity wasn't alone in the universe. General Chen sat at the head of the emergency council table, still struggling to believe what he was hearing. For 30 years, he had planned for wars between nations, never imagining he might one day be asked to fight alongside aliens against creatures from another galaxy. The translated message had been analyzed by every expert on Earth, and the conclusion was always the same. This was real, and these beings needed help desperately. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, said President Williams, looking round the room at the assembled leaders. An alien civilization is asking us for military assistance against something they call the Harthic Swarm. They're offering us technology and a place in their galactic community in exchange for our help. In their war, Dr. Kim, the world's leading expert on theoretical alien life, nodded grimly. Based on our analysis of their transmission, this swarm has already destroyed nearly 50 different civilizations. The aliens contacting us have tried everything: diplomacy, advanced weapons, even retreating to fortified worlds. Nothing has worked. But why us? Asked the British Prime Minister. If these aliens are so advanced, why would they need help from a species that hasn't even left its own solar system? The answer came from an unexpected source, Colonel Rivera, a veteran of conflicts around the world, had been studying the alien message from a military perspective. "Because we're different," he said quietly. "Every description we have of these other alien civilizations suggests they're peaceful, evolved beyond the need for warfare. They approach conflict like a chess game, calculated, civilized, with rules." He stood up and walked to the large screen, displaying Earth's military history. "Look at our planet. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've had to survive ice ages, natural disasters, predators, diseases, and environments that would kill most life forms. We don't fight wars like chess games. We fight them like our survival depends on it, because it usually does." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity's violent history, the thing they were often ashamed of, might be exactly what was needed to save an entire galaxy. General Chen made the decision that would change everything. "We send a delegation, 3 people, a scientist to understand what we're dealing with, a military strategist to assess the threat, and a diplomat to handle negotiations. We go there. We see what this swarm is capable of, and then we decide." If Earth gets involved, the selection process took another day of intense debate. Dr. Kim was the obvious choice for the science role. She had spent her entire career studying the possibility of alien life. Commander Park, with her background in strategic analysis and worst-case scenario planning, would handle the military assessment. The diplomatic role went to Ambassador Foster, who had successfully negotiated peace treaties in some of the world's most hostile environments. None of them had ever imagined they would be humanity's first official representatives to an alien civilization. The aliens had provided coordinates to a meeting place, something they called Station Omega-7. In a distant star system, they had also transmitted the plans for a faster-than-light communication device, allowing the human ship to navigate to the meeting point. For the first time in human history, people would travel beyond their own solar system. The ship Endeavour launched 3 weeks later, carrying not just the 3 ambassadors, but also a full crew of scientists, engineers, and military observers, as they made their first jump to faster-than-light travel, using technology given to them by desperate aliens. Every person on board felt the weight of representing their entire species. The journey took days, but it felt like a lifetime. When they finally arrived at Station Omega-7, the crew stared in amazement at the massive structure floating in space. It was clearly alien in design. Organic curves mixed with crystalline formations that seemed to grow rather than being built. Nothing like the angular, mechanical constructions humans were used to. The first meeting between the species took place in a specially prepared chamber on the station. The humans, wearing their standard environmental suits, waited nervously as the airlock opened to reveal their first alien contact. Ambassador Crystal entered the chamber, and both species stopped to stare at each other. The Villenari was beautiful, in an otherworldly way, tall and slender, with skin that looked like living crystal and eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient wisdom. But there was something fragile about her, something that made the humans instinctively want to speak more softly and move more carefully. "Welcome, humans of Earth," Crystal said through the translation device. "We are grateful that you answered our call." Commander Park stepped forward as the designated speaker. "We received your message. Before we can offer any assistance, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Tell us about this swarm." What followed was 3 hours of the most disturbing briefing any human had ever received. The Harthic weren't just conquerors, they were consumers. They didn't want territory or resources in any way humans could understand. They wanted to literally eat every living thing they encountered, using the genetic material to create new, more dangerous versions of themselves. Dr. Kim asked the question everyone was thinking. How is that possible? How can they adapt so quickly? Crystal's crystalline features dim with what seemed like exhaustion. They are not individuals as you understand them. They are one mind controlling billions of bodies. When they encounter a new defense, they learn from it instantly. When they absorb a new species, they gain its abilities. They have consumed the genetic knowledge of 47 civilizations. The human delegation exchanged glances. They had seen horror in their own world's history, But nothing quite like this. Show us," said Ambassador Foster. "We need to see what we're dealing with." The holographic display that followed would haunt every human present for the rest of their lives. Worlds that had once been green and beautiful, transformed into nightmarish landscapes of organic towers and crawling creatures, civilizations that had existed for thousands of years, reduced to feeding grounds for an endless hunger. But what struck the humans most was not the horror of the destruction. It was the pattern of how civilizations had fallen. In every case, the attacked species had tried to fight according to their moral codes. They had attempted to minimize casualties, protect civilian populations, and preserve their cultural values even in the face of extinction, Colonel Rivera saw. At first, they're fighting clean wars against an enemy that doesn't understand the concept. "What do you mean?" asked Crystal. Every species that fought the swarm tried to maintain their civilization's values while fighting. They held back, tried to limit damage, focused on protecting rather than destroying. But you can't fight something like this with half measures. Ambassador Foster leaned forward. "What are you saying?" Rivera looked around the room, knowing his next words would define humanity's role in this war. "I'm saying that maybe the galaxy needs a species that knows how to fight dirty. A species that understands that sometimes, to save everything good, you have to be willing to do terrible things." The alien delegation seemed confused by this concept. But Dr. Kim understood immediately. He's talking about our survival instinct. Every other species evolved on worlds that were safe, predictable. They developed civilization without the constant pressure of extinction. We didn't have that luxury. Crystal studied the humans with new interest. "You speak of warfare as if it were natural to you." "It is," Commander Park said simply. "On our world, everything is trying to kill everything else. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even the ground we walk on can be deadly. We didn't choose to be fighters. We became fighters because anything else meant dying out." The negotiation that followed lasted to days. The aliens offered humanity access to galactic technology, star charts showing thousands of habitable worlds, and recognition as a full member of galactic civilization. In return, they wanted human military expertise and a commitment to help fight the swarm. It was Ambassador Foster who asked the crucial question: what happens to us after the war? Assuming we win, what becomes of humanity in your galaxy? Crystal was quiet for a long moment. "That depends on what kind of species you prove to be. We are inviting you into our civilization, but we are also afraid of you. Your reputation preceded you. The galaxy has known about Earth for centuries, but we chose to avoid contact because your capacity for violence frightened us. And now that same capacity is exactly what you need." Dr. Kim observed. "Yes, we are hoping that you will be our salvation. We are also terrified that you might become our next threat." The human delegation requested time to confer in a private chamber. They debated the decision that would determine humanity's future. "We could say no," Foster pointed out. "Go back to Earth, warn everyone, and prepare our own defenses." The transport ships carrying the first human expeditionary force dropped out of faster-than-light travel above what had once been called Zirian Prime. Colonel Santos stood at the observation deck, looking down at what the alien briefings had described as a recently contested agricultural world. What she saw below made her stomach turn. The planet that should have been covered in green fields and peaceful cities was now a nightmare landscape. Massive organic towers stretched into the atmosphere like twisted trees, pulsing with sickly light. Rivers of some kind of biological fluid flowed between structures that seemed to breathe and move on their own. This wasn't just conquest. This was transformation on a scale that defied human understanding. "Jesus," whispered Lieutenant Torres, standing beside her. "How long did they say this took?" 3 weeks, Santos replied quietly. 3 weeks to turn an entire world into that. The 10,000 volunteers of the Expeditionary Force came from every branch of Earth's military: Marines, soldiers, pilots, special forces operators. All of them had volunteered for what everyone knew might be a one-way mission. They had trained for 6 months using alien technology and intelligence reports. But nothing could have prepared them for the reality of facing the Harthic swarm. The first landing zone was established on what remained of Zirion Prime's northern continent as the human forces descended in their shuttles. They could see movement in the organic structures below, thousands of creatures scuttling between the twisted formations like ants in a disturbed nest. Captain Rodriguez led the first reconnaissance patrol onto the surface. The moment their boots touched the ground, they knew they were in a different kind of war. The air itself seemed alive, thick with spores and strange smells that made their environmental sensors go crazy. The ground beneath their feet wasn't soil anymore. It was some kind of living tissue that responded to their footsteps. Contact front. The shout came from Sergeant Thompson, who was manning the forward position. From the organic structures ahead of them came a sound like nothing any human had ever heard. A chittering, clicking noise that seemed to come from 1,000 throats at once. The creatures that emerged from the Harthic structures looked like someone's worst nightmare. They were roughly humanoid, but wrong in every way that mattered. Some had too many arms. Others moved on legs that bent in impossible directions. Their heads were collections of eyes and teeth that seemed to shift and change as the humans watched. But what made them truly horrifying was the way they moved, with the coordination of a single mind, controlling hundreds of bodies. The first engagement lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, 12 humans were dead, and the patrol had eliminated over 100 Harthic creatures. But more importantly, they had learned something that would change everything about this war. They're not invincible. Rodriguez reported. Back to base camp. They're tough, they're fast, and they work together like nothing I've ever seen. But they can be stopped. What the humans had discovered was something the galaxy's other species had missed. The Harthic were indeed adaptive and dangerous, but they had never faced an enemy that seemed to actually enjoy fighting them. While other species had approached the swarm with fear and reluctance, humans approached them with something the creatures had never encountered: aggressive enthusiasm. Sergeant Thompson, a veteran of conflicts around Earth, summed it up perfectly. During the mission debrief, "Sir, these things are scary. But they're not scarier than that time we had to clear those caves in Afghanistan. At least these creatures don't have explosives." The alien observers embedded with the human forces filed reports that their superiors initially refused to believe. Commander Zethkin of the Villanari watched in amazement as human soldiers actually laughed, while under fire from creatures that had sent entire galactic armies into retreat. "I don't understand," Zethkin confided to Colonel Santos during a brief. "Break in fighting. Your casualties are significant, yet your soldiers maintain morale. When the Lorian forces faced similar losses, they required psychological rehabilitation." Santos looked at the alien officer with something approaching pity. "Commander, I lost 3 soldiers today in the battle for Moscow during our Second World War. We lost 3,000 in a single hour, and we kept fighting. This is what we do." The tactical breakthrough came during the second week of operations. Lieutenant Welch, leading a strike team against a Harthic breeding facility, made a decision that horrified their alien allies but proved devastatingly effective against the swarm. Instead of trying to capture the facility intact, as previous galactic forces had attempted, Welch ordered his team to destroy everything. When the Harthic creatures rushed to defend their breeding chambers, the humans collapsed the entire structure on top of them. The facility was completely destroyed. Along with thousands of developing swarm creatures, you eliminated an entire generation of their forces, Zethkin said afterward, clearly disturbed. "But you also destroyed valuable intelligence and biological samples." Welch shrugged. "Commander, with respect, we're not here to study these things. We're here to stop them. Sometimes that means breaking things that can't be fixed." This became the pattern of human warfare against the swarm, where other species had tried to fight surgically, preserving infrastructure and minimizing collateral damage. Humans fought with the understanding that everything touched by the Harthic was already lost. Their strategy became simple: destroy everything the enemy needed to survive, regardless of what else got destroyed in the process. The psychological impact on the swarm was unprecedented. For the first time in their existence, the Harthic encountered an enemy that seemed to welcome destruction as much as they did. Human forces would charge into battles that other species would consider suicide missions, singing songs and making jokes even as their comrades fell around them. Captain Lee, a combat engineer, discovered that the swarm creatures actually seemed to hesitate when facing humans who were laughing. It's like they don't know what to make of us. She reported, they're used to enemies who fear death. We've got soldiers who treat this like the best video game they've ever played, the Alien. Observers struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Major Foster, a combat psychologist embedded with the human forces, tried to explain it to the bewildered Velnari delegation. Your species evolved on safe worlds. She said, war, for you, is an aberration, something that happens when diplomacy fails. For humans, conflict is Tuesday. We've been fighting for survival since we first stood upright. This isn't unusual for us. It's what we do. But the war was taking its toll. After 2 months of constant fighting, even the resilient human forces were showing strain. The Harthic creatures were adapting to human tactics, developing new forms, specifically designed to counter human advantages. Some grew thicker armor to resist human weapons. Others developed toxins that could penetrate human environmental suits. Dr. Hayes, the expedition's chief medical officer, worked around the clock to treat injuries that no human doctor had ever seen before. Soldiers came back from missions with wounds that seemed to move on their own, infected with Harthic organisms that tried to transform human tissue into something else. We're winning, she reported to General Chen via quantum communication back to Earth. But we're paying for every victory. These creatures learn from every engagement. They're starting to adapt to our tactics. The turning point came when Sergeant Davis made a discovery that would change the entire war. During a particularly brutal engagement, he noticed that the Harthic creatures seemed to be communicating through the organic structures around them. The buildings weren't just shelters, they were part of the creature's nervous system. What if we're fighting this wrong? Davis asked during the tactical briefing. We've been treating each group of creatures as separate enemies. But what if they're all connected? What if we could hurt all of them by hitting the right target? The plan that emerged was typically human in its audacity. Instead of continuing to fight the swarm creatures individually, they would target the organic network that connected them. It would require a coordinated assault on every Harthic structure simultaneously, a battle plan that would commit their entire force to a single desperate gamble. Colonel Santos gathered her officers for the final briefing. I'm not going to lie to you. This plan has about a 30% chance of success. If it fails, we'll probably all be dead by tomorrow. But if it works, we might just give these things their first real defeat. The assault began at dawn. Every human unit on Zirian Prime attacked their assigned targets simultaneously. The response from the swarm was immediate and terrifying. Every Harthic creature on the planet seemed to converge on the human positions at once. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most brutal in human history. For 6 hours, 10,000 humans fought against hundreds of thousands of swarm creatures in a battle that covered an entire continent. The organic structures around them pulsed and writhed as the humans poured everything they had into destroying the network that connected their enemies. 6 months after the victory on Zirian Prime, the war had spread across 12 star systems. The humans had proven that the Harthic could be beaten, but the swarm was learning faster than anyone had expected. Each new battle brought evolved creatures specifically designed to counter human tactics. What had once been a shocking advantage was slowly becoming an even match. Lieutenant Colonel Wall stood in the command center of Forward Base Delta, studying the holographic display that showed the current battle lines. The situation was grim. Human forces were holding their ground, but barely. The swarm had adapted to their shock tactics, developing creatures with thicker armor and better coordination. Worse yet, they had started using human tactics against other galactic forces, wiping out Velnari fleets in battles that lasted less than an hour. The problem is we're still fighting their war, Walsh said to the assembled officers. We're trying to hold territory, protect assets, maintain supply lines. Everything we do is reactive. Captain Chen, the base's intelligence officer, nodded grimly. The swarm forces us to defend things, then overwhelms our defenses. It's the same pattern they used against every other species. Walsh had been thinking about this problem for weeks. She had studied every human conflict from ancient history to recent wars, looking for some principle that might apply to fighting an enemy that could adapt to any strategy. That's when she found her answer in the most unlikely place, the writings of ancient military philosophers from Earth. What if we stop trying to hold anything? She asked the room. What if we make them defend instead? The strategy that emerged was so radical that it horrified their alien allies. Instead of trying to protect worlds from the swarm, human forces would implement what they called scorched earth tactics. They would evacuate civilian populations and then systematically destroy everything that the swarm could use: food sources, infrastructure, even the planets themselves if necessary. The first test of this strategy came at the agricultural world of Kepler 438b. The Harthic had already begun their invasion, transforming the northern continent into their characteristic organic landscape. Instead of trying to retake the territory, human forces concentrated on making it useless to the enemy. Major Rodriguez led the mission that would define this new approach to the war. Her team's job was simple in concept but terrible in execution. Destroy the planet's entire ecosystem before the swarm could fully adapt to it. Command. This is Phoenix Team. Rodriguez reported as her unit prepared to deploy a biological weapon of their own. Design beginning sterilization protocol. Once we start this, there's no going back. The weapon wasn't like anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of trying to kill the swarm creatures directly, it targeted the organic network they had created. Within hours of deployment, the twisted towers began to wither. The breathing ground started to crack and die. The Harthic creatures found themselves trapped on a world that could no longer support their biology. But the cost was everything. Kepler 438b, which had fed billions of people across 3 star systems, became a dead rock floating in space. The humans had won by destroying the prize completely. The reaction from their galactic allies was immediate and intense. Ambassador Crystal confronted General Chen during an emergency conference call that would be remembered as one of the most difficult moments in human-alien relations. You destroyed an entire world, she said, her crystalline features reflecting her distress. Kepler 438b sustained life for over 1 million years. The ecosystems there were irreplaceable. General Chen's response was characteristically blunt. Ambassador, with respect, that world was already lost the moment the swarm touched it. We didn't destroy it. We prevented it from becoming a weapon against you. There must have been another way, Crystal insisted. Some method that preserved the world while defeating the enemy. If there was, your people would have found it in the last 3 years. Chen replied, sometimes the only way to win is to make sure nobody can win. This exchange highlighted the fundamental difference between human and galactic thinking about warfare. The other species still believed in clean victories, in winning without losing what made the victory worthwhile. Humans understood that sometimes survival meant accepting losses. That would horrify a more civilized species. The effectiveness of the new strategy became clear over the following months. The Harthic, for the first time in their existence, found themselves facing resource shortages. Worlds they conquered became useless, unable to support their continued expansion. More importantly, they began to show signs of something no galactic species had ever observed in them before. Hesitation. Sergeant Thompson, now leading reconnaissance missions deep in swarm territory, reported the first confirmed instance of Harthic creatures retreating from a battle they could have won. They pulled back from the mining station Angli 667C, even though they had us outnumbered 5-1. I think they're starting to realize that winning battles might not be worth it if we just destroy everything afterward. The psychological impact of this realization spread throughout the swarm's hive mind. For creatures that existed to consume and expand, the concept of an enemy that would rather destroy resources than lose them was fundamentally disturbing. Dr. Kim, now serving as the expedition's chief xenobiologist, studied this development with fascination and concern. "We're not just fighting them anymore," she reported to Earth Command. "We're teaching them to think differently about survival. The question is whether that makes them more dangerous or less." The answer came during the battle for the TRAPPIST system, where 7 worlds orbited a single star. The swarm had conquered 4 of them when human forces arrived with a plan. That shocked even their own commanders. Instead of fighting for the planets, they would destroy the star itself. The mission required cooperation between human forces and every remaining galactic fleet. While the aliens provided technical expertise and massive firepower, human crews would pilot the ships that would actually trigger the stellar collapse. Commander Park, now leading the Tactical Planning Division, explained the mission to the volunteer. "Crews, we're going to turn this star into a weapon. When it goes supernova, it will sterilize every world in the system. The swarm will lose for conquered planets and billions of creatures in a single stroke. The risks were enormous. Any ship within 3 light years when the star exploded would be destroyed." The crews volunteering for the mission knew they probably wouldn't survive. To see the results of their work, Lieutenant Foster, piloting the lead ship in the mission, sent a final message to her family on Earth as her team approached the stars. "Core, tell Mom and Dad that their little girl is about to light up the biggest firework in galactic history. The swarm wanted a war of consumption. We're giving them a war of elimination instead." The stellar collapse took 6 hours from initiation to explosion. When it was over, the TRAPPIST system had become an expanding sphere of radiation and debris. 4 Harthic worlds had been completely sterilized, along with an estimated 50 billion swarm creatures. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers, it was in the psychological impact. For the first time since the war began, the Harthic swarm began to retreat from multiple systems simultaneously. They had learned that humans would rather destroy the galaxy than let it be consumed. The other galactic species struggled to understand what they had witnessed. The Lorian Collective, known for their philosophical approach to conflict, published papers trying to analyze the moral implications of the human strategy. The Zephyrants, masters of logical thinking, found themselves unable to comprehend a species that would choose mutual destruction over surrender. Commander Zethkin, who had observed human forces from the beginning of the war, tried to explain it to his superiors. "They don't fight to preserve their civilization," he reported. "They fight to prevent their enemies from having anything to preserve. It's not warfare as we understand it, it's weaponized spite." The tide had indeed turned, but the victory came with a price. That went beyond simple casualties. Entire star systems had been rendered uninhabitable. Worlds that had supported life for millions of years were now barren rocks, or expanding clouds of radiation. Yet for the first time since the Harthic appeared, the galaxy's surviving civilizations had hope. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable were now retreating, learning to fear an enemy that valued destruction over preservation. As human forces prepared for what intelligence suggested would be the final phase of the war, they carried with them the weight of what they had done. They had saved the galaxy by proving they were willing to destroy it. Colonel Walsh, now promoted to general and leading the combined human-alien forces, summed up the situation in her final report before the assault on the swarm's home system. "We've taught them that some enemies can't be adapted to or absorbed. Sometimes the only way to defeat a monster is to become something it can't understand. The question now is whether we can remember how to be human again after this war is over." The swarm had learned to fear the Deathworlders. Soon, they would learn whether that fear was enough to save them. The final battle for the galaxy would take place at a world that no longer deserved to be called a planet. Target Omega, the Harthic primary hive world, had been so completely consumed by the swarm that it had become a living organism the size of a small moon. From space, it looked like a giant heart beating in the darkness, pumping out new creatures and sending them across the galaxy to consume everything in their path. General Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, looking at the nightmare world that hung before them. Around him, the combined fleet of human and alien ships prepared for what everyone knew would be the last. Battle of the war. Either they would destroy the swarm's heart today, or the galaxy would fall completely. Sir, we're receiving final casualty estimates from the fleet, reported Captain Liu, his communications officer. The numbers were sobering. Of the 50,000 humans who had volunteered for this mission, fewer than half were expected to survive. The alien casualties would be even higher. Their ships and crew simply weren't designed for the kind of assault they were about to attempt. What about the bioweapon deployment? Chen asked. Dr. Kim reports that the atmospheric contamination is already at 30%, Liu replied. The planet's breathing cycles are spreading our toxins through the entire organism. But sir, you are people down there, Chen nodded grimly. The assault teams that had landed on target Omega to deploy. The biological weapons were essentially on a suicide mission. The toxins designed to kill the hive world would be just as deadly to humans. But someone had to get close enough to ensure proper distribution. Down on the surface of the hive world, Lieutenant Rodriguez led her team through corridors that seemed to pulse with alien life. The walls around them weren't built, they had grown, creating a maze of organic tunnels that extended deep into the planet's core. Every step forward brought them closer to the central nervous system of the swarm, and closer to their own deaths. Rodriguez to base, she whispered into her communicator. We're at the primary nerve cluster. Beginning final deployment now. The device they carried was humanity's ultimate weapon against the swarm, a biological virus, designed to attack the very thing that made the hive mind possible. When it spread through the organic network, it would essentially give the entire swarm species a stroke, breaking the mental connections that allowed billions of creatures to act as one. But using it required someone to get to the planet's core and manually activate the deployment system. And once activated, the toxins would make the entire world uninhabitable within hours. Rodriguez. This is General Chen. You know you don't have to do this. We can find another way. Rodriguez smiled grimly as she and her team worked to install the device around them. The walls were beginning to show signs of the toxin's effects. The constant pulsing was becoming irregular, and strange sounds echoed through the corridors as the hive mind began to malfunction. Sir, with respect, we both know there isn't another way. Besides, someone's got to make sure these things never threaten anyone again. The battle raging in space above them was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships, designed for the brutal conditions of space around Earth, pushed through clouds of toxic gas and swarms of flying creatures that emerged from the hive world, like antibodies from an infected wound. Alien vessels, their crews protected by advanced life support systems, provided covering fire and strategic support. Commander Park, now leading the space battle from her command ship, watched as wave after wave of Harthic creatures launch themselves at the fleet. But something was different about this attack. The creatures that had once moved with perfect coordination were beginning to show signs of confusion. Some attacked their own allies, others simply drifted in space, apparently unable to receive orders from the hive mind. The bioweapon is working, she reported to General Chen. The swarm is losing cohesion. But sir, we need to evacuate the surface teams now, or we'll lose them all. Chen made the hardest decision of his military career. Negative, Commander. The mission comes first. All surface teams are to complete their objectives. In the depths of the hive world, Rodriguez and her team had reached the central chamber, a vast space filled with organic computers that processed the thoughts of billions of creatures. Across the galaxy, the sight was both terrifying and magnificent, like standing inside the brain of a god. Final deployment in 30 seconds, Rodriguez announced, knowing that everyone who heard her transmission understood what it meant. It's been an honor serving with you all. The virus spread through the hive world's nervous system faster than anyone had calculated. Within minutes, the planet-sized organism began to convulse. The organic towers on the surface started to collapse. The breathing atmosphere became erratic, then stopped entirely. In space, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Harthic creatures that had been attacking the fleet suddenly stopped mid-assault. Some simply died on the spot. Others began attacking each other in a frenzy of confusion as their hive mind connection severed. But the cost was exactly what everyone had feared. The surface teams, including Rodriguez and her volunteers, were lost as the bioweapon made the entire world uninhabitable. They had succeeded in their mission, but none of them would live to see the victory they had made possible. The battle for Target Omega lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Harthic swarm had been completely eliminated as a galactic threat. Their primary hive was dead, their coordination destroyed, and their remaining creatures scattered across dozens of systems, without the intelligence to organize new attacks. But the victory celebration was muted. Of the 50,000 humans who had participated in the final battle, only 12,000 survived. Entire ships had been lost, along with their crews. The aliens had suffered even higher casualty rates, losing vessels and personnel that represented centuries of technological development. General Chen stood in the aftermath, looking at the dead world that had once been the heart of the swarm. Around him, the surviving human and alien crews began the long process of recovery and rebuilding. Ambassador Crystal approached him as he watched the evacuation shuttles returning from the battle zone. Her crystalline features reflected both gratitude and something that might have been fear. General, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank humanity for what you've done here. You saved countless worlds and billions of lives. Chen nodded, but his expression remained serious. Ambassador, we've also shown the galaxy what humans are capable of. When we're pushed to our limits, I hope your people are prepared for what that means going forward. Crystal was quiet for a moment. We invited you into our galaxy because we needed warriors. Now we must learn to live with the consequences of that decision. The months following the victory brought changes that no one had anticipated. Humanity found itself in a unique position in galactic society, simultaneously heroes and objects of concern. They had saved the galaxy, but they had done it in ways that made other species deeply uncomfortable. Dr. Kim, now serving as Earth's chief representative to the Galactic Council, worked to establish new protocols for human integration into galactic civilization. The challenge wasn't technical or political, it was psychological. How do you integrate a species that approaches problems differently than everyone else? The other species keep asking us to promise that we'll never use our methods against them, she explained to the council during one particularly difficult session. But they don't understand that our methods aren't weapons we can choose to use or not use. They're part of who we are. The solution came from an unexpected source, Commander Zethkin, the Villanari officer who had observed human forces throughout the war, proposed what became known as the Guardian Protocol. Humanity should not be integrated into normal galactic society, he argued. They should be recognized as something unique, a species specifically adapted to handle threats that normal civilization cannot face. Let them patrol the galaxy's borders, watching for dangers that might emerge from the unknown regions of space. The idea was both practical and symbolic. Humanity would be given ships, technology, and resources to establish monitoring stations at the edge of known space. They would be the galaxy's early warning system, the first line of defense against threats that might make the Harthic swarm look insignificant by comparison. But more than that, it would give humanity a purpose that matched their nature. Instead of trying to become like other galactic species, they would embrace what made them different. General Chen accepted the role on behalf of Earth with a simple statement that became legendary. Throughout the galaxy, we've been fighting for survival, our entire existence. Now we'll fight for everyone else's survival too. The transformation took 5 years to complete. Human patrol fleets now guard the edges of galactic civilization, crewed by volunteers who understand that they might face threats that could destroy entire star systems. They operate under rules of engagement that give them authority to take whatever measures necessary to protect the galaxy, even if those measures would horrify the civilizations they're protecting.